Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. Our dedication to living life joyfully allows us to confront the reality of unmitigated deception and political denial of the harm caused by nuclear and chemical contamination. We demand an end to corporate control of science and suppression of facts for political and financial gain. We are not assets on a balance sheet. We must honestly work together to remediate damage to benefit our planet and humanity. Remember, happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. Join the Age of Fission radio show on Spreaker.com. Search for Lonnie Clark for all our podcasted shows. Podcasts are also on YouTube at nutzforart, nutzforart. Thank you for being part of the solution. Good afternoon. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to remind you that you can follow me on YouTube at nutzforart. That's Nuts for Art. And you can follow my podcast on Spreaker. I have several channels on Spreaker under Lonnie Clark. We have the Age of Fission radio show. I actually mirror Libby Halevi's show, the Nuclear Hot Seat, and Dave's Operation Save the Earth, his Fuku Friday podcasts are all on my Spreaker channel. So I want to thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to have, I guess, one of the leaders of the Biosphere with us, Mr. Kevin Hester. I actually am new to activism, as anybody who's followed my channel understands that I have not been an activist for all of my life. So Kevin Hester is a new person, relative new. I've only known about him for several years. This is my first opportunity to interview him and actually have any kind of extensive conversation. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us. I'm very excited to have you with us.
It's an absolute pleasure, Lonnie.
Thank you. So why don't you tell our audience who you are and how you got into, you run a podcast with Guy McPherson, who we interviewed last week, and you run Nature Bats Last. How did you and Guy hook up? How did your travel of activism, how did you become a speaker for letting people know that we're on a very thin edge here of ice?
Well, it started a very long time ago when I was in my teens. So that was, I'm 58. So when I was in my late teens, I got involved in the anti-nuclear movement in New Zealand because it was a very formative time in our history. And we protested, like everyone else around the world, we protested against nuclear testing, atmospheric testing in the Pacific. And we had one of the few huge victories that the anti-nuclear movement had, and we managed to get New Zealand nuclear-free. At the same time, I was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. So I was, I grew up in a house that found racism abhorrent. So it was obvious and easy for me to get involved in the anti-nuclear struggle. So effectively, I've been involved in that kind of activism pretty much all my adult life. And it's the thing that's given my life the most meaning. So I'd really encourage young people to get involved. It's real. It's honest. And it's the antithesis of this society and this culture that we all live in, which is so dishonest and immoral.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about the honesty. I think that's one of the most challenging parts of being what I call a nuke truther. I don't like to call myself anything anti. I'm not really an anti-nuker. I just want the truth. It's the dishonesty that has really, and what's interesting is how the dishonesty comes from all sides. This dishonesty comes from the co-opted corporations. It comes from the co-opted anti-nuclear movement. I mean, it's and then the hard part is the discernment of what's real, what's not real. One of the things when we talked, I emailed you some of the questions I had. I've had this big fascination since I started paying attention to the nuclear industry, which really, frankly, only happened 7 years ago in 2012, when I realized that Obama really didn't tell us the truth, that things weren't really good. That's when I realized, like, oh my God, it's bad. I started doing my own research. But then I also came across this whole thing about geoengineering, which you say you don't aspire to. I actually think that it is part of the nuclear deception. I think those two things go. There's something intrinsically engaged between the two of them, because I've had people yell at me. Have people commenting on my website on my channel YouTube, Nuts for Art, that I don't talk about geoengineering enough, that it's collapsing the environment and blah 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 blah. What do you say to all that? Because I think it's a cacophony of I don't think we really quite know. When you talk about the dishonesty, that's what brought me into that train of thought.
My position on to start with, every time we start our car, we're geoengineering. Every time we use anything about industrial civilization, it emits carbon, or it came to us because of the emission of carbon. That's all geoengineering. But my take on the I assume when you talk about it, you're meaning the chemtrail meme. My take on that is that years ago, I had a group of 747 pilots visiting my house. I had an association with a Luxembourg-based cargo company called Cargo Lux, and they fly 747s around the world. And I had this group of these pilots at my house, and I asked them then, what do you guys think about this chemtrail story? And they all thought it was a myth. And they said it's quite possible that experiments will have been done, and that's a given. We know there's patents for it. But they said there's no way it could be happening in any kind of scale without people really being able to prove it. And I just don't believe the Dane Wigington approach to every time you look up into the sky, you see a chemtrail. I think it's the perfect way for the fossil fuel industry to divert attention, and possibly even the nuclear industry, to divert attention away from themselves and find someone else to blame for the fact that the biosphere is in the early stages of collapse.
Well, I think that it's I think we don't know. This is the thing. Like, I can tell you this. I live in Eugene, Oregon. I came here 15 years ago. I had never in my life, because I lived in LA all my life, you don't really see the sky when you live in LA. It's just a big mass of smog, basically. Even on clear days that you think it's clear, but when the sun comes out, when the sun goes down, there's no stars. I mean, it is an interesting thing to live in the bubble of Los Angeles and then leave and go live in a different environment. The first time I saw the geoengineering in the sky, it looked like a checkerboard. And I actually called the police. I'm like, what's going on up there? They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, lady, don't you see the sky? So I think there is something to the whole thing about what Dane Wigington says. I mean, and again, to rely on, to me, pilots is like relying on somebody like Jay Cullen, who says that there's no radioactivity in the Pacific Ocean. So I think that there's just this huge... Like, when I went to college at the University of Oregon, I was in an environmental politics class, and they were talking about the environmental collapse, and he clicked on a thing about geoengineering. They're teaching the students in school that is part of the solution to the collapsing atmosphere, that what they're trying to do is stave off the radiation from collapsing our environment. So we have to have this chemtrailing, the geoengineering up there.
One thing I'd point out about you noticing in more recent times that there's a lot more in the sky. There are two contributors to that. There's infinitely more aeroplanes now flying, jet aeroplanes flying up in the atmosphere, and the second thing is that as we warm the global mean temperature, there's more water vapor in the atmosphere. For every 1 degree C, we increase the global mean temperature, we get another 7% water vapor up there. So we've already got 10% more water vapor, and then we've got a hell of a lot more planes flying through it. Well, I'm not saying that it isn't happening and that they won't geoengineer. I'm certain that they will. The dominant culture will go out and they'll do something radical if they haven't already done it. But I have to say that I am skeptical about the Dane Wigington perspective on it.
I'm not. I have to admit, me personally, I'm not at all. I mean, I've gone to his website. I actually listened to it, and he does encourage you to find the documents, which I have done. And after having done this in the nuclear industry, my questions are, this is where I want to go, and I'm going to keep pursuing someone that might be able to help me. I think they are intrinsically involved. The two programs, the putting aluminum in our skies and pouring, the chemical saturation of our planet happened about the same time as the nuclear industry. And it could be all part of it to make us not pay attention to what the oil industry is doing. And I mean, nuclear is the new N-word. You cannot say that we're being nuclear contaminated to anybody. You talk to anyone, their eyes glaze over. And it's almost the same thing with geoengineering. So I think the biggest issue is what you really talk about, is that we are having an environmental collapse that we cannot stop. If we stopped all of it today, we're already way far beyond being able to turn the ship around. That's what I think. Am I incorrect?
Yes. There's no question that we've already gone off the cliff.
So I guess it's a matter of us just attempting to throw a rope back on the edge of the cliff so a few of us can survive.
Well, I don't even think that's going to be possible. We're animals, and we need habitat, and habitat on this planet is going away. And I think what people don't get is the non-linear nature of where we're at in this situation now. Michael E. Mann famously came up with the hockey stick theory, and he talked about how it would ramp up in a non-linear way. Now that it's doing it, and all our graphs are all going in the wrong direction, people like Michael Mann no longer want to talk about it. For years and years, us in the environmental movement used to talk about the danger of crossing tipping points. Now that we have crossed so many tipping points, no one wants to talk about that or use that terminology anymore.
Well, wasn't one of the tipping points was when we didn't... I watched about 5 years ago, I guess it's been 4 or 5 years ago, it was called The Arctic Death Spiral and the Methane Time Bomb. And it was a compilation of all these scientists who were studying the melting ice and the warming of the oceans. And the biggest thing was the disappearing ice. And there was about 5 or 6 independently functioning scientific groups that had been studying it, and every single one of them said that when we go without ice in the Arctic, we are going to go on, it's going to be very rapid. It's going to be a methane time bomb, that it will release so much methane that we are going to have a collapse in the atmosphere.
There's a very contentious issue at the moment with the issue of the methane time bomb. Recently, Michael Mann has come out with some other scientists and said that the methane risk is being overstated. Mm-hmm. And I find that incredible that these people are ignoring the precautionary principle. There are 2 famous Russian scientists who study at the University of Fairbanks in Alaska, called Natalia Shakova and Igor Semilatov. And what they have hypothesized is that we could have a 50 gigaton burst of methane at any point. She said that 12 years ago. Sorry, in 2012. So she said that 7 years ago that could happen at any time. Since that time, our emissions have skyrocketed. The amount of warming on the planet has skyrocketed, both in a non-linear way. So the risk is higher today than when she said it. And Michael Mann's just come out recently and said, oh no, we shouldn't be worrying about that. It's not as bad as what some people are saying. But that completely ignores the precautionary principle.
Why do you think he does that?
He is a tenured professor on a very large salary at Penn State University in the United States. Penn State has a very large connection to the US military. Wow. They know everything that I know. I wouldn't mind betting that Michael Mann has been promised a bunker, and that his job, he's the go-to guy for the mainstream media or the corporate media, I should call it, when they want someone to give an opinion about climate change. So people take it as verbatim what he's saying, but I don't think he's telling the truth. I have a post on my website called "The Liar Michael Mann," where he said recently in an interview that if we impose a carbon tax in the next 10 years, we'll be able to keep warming to below 1. Yeah, we'll be able to keep warming to below 1.5 C.
What?
This brings up another issue of the baseline that we're using for global warming. Historically, the baseline was 1750. But what they're doing now is they're moving it out. So they start quoting what it was in 1850. I've seen much later dates being used, like in the 1950s. But if you ignore that previous warming, you ignore what's already kicked in. So it's just total dishonesty.
You know, in all this conversation, we never talk about the effect of all those nuclear bombs on the environment. Like, I remember, you know, that Al Gore movie where he looked at he went on that little trip where it spiked way up, right? This is what happened because of the cars. There was never a conversation about that same time that we blasted the planet with one of the most deadly toxins ever, over 2,000 times. I mean, I think this is why, like, as soon as I really discovered about what was going on at Fukushima, and then I started doing other research about other things, and the level of contaminants and the subtlety of its harm, it's just been something on my brain. I really believe, for me, it's one of my hot buttons, is that the climate change activists absolutely refuse to discuss the effects of nuclear contamination on the climate.
One of the interesting things about nuclear contamination and how it affects our genetic makeup is that it happens relatively slowly. It's a multi-generational thing. And in humans, that means that, you know, the worst of the nuclear industry won't strike us wouldn't have struck us for generations in the future. But if you look at things like studies that have been done by people like Tim Mousseau about moths and butterflies, because they have such a short life, they are finding lots and lots of genetic damage done in those kind of species now. That's what we would have faced in humans.
And extinction. This is the thing. It's extinction because those animals are becoming sterile. They don't reproduce. So that's what I'm saying about the effects of climate change. Like, this was I even said this to Dr. Busby, like, to me, the fact that no one's respecting the idea that all this nuclear contamination pouring into the oceans has to affect the microscopic life at a very small level. Like, it's affecting the tiniest of the tiniest, and that goes up the food chain. So it completely limits the whole biology of what things are. And this is the hard factor. This is the part that makes you the most angry, and the part where you just don't know what to do, because 27,400 years is a long time for plutonium to get its half-life done. We have been blasted with plutonium. We know plutonium causes schizophrenia, diabetes, autoimmune deficiencies, and cancers, and genetic disabilities. Like, the thing is, with the genetics, it takes 4 generations, at least. Dr. Caldecott said at least 4 generations. But that doesn't stop the autoimmune deficiencies, and as we as humans get it, you know other species get it. Right? So it's a cacophony of everything, and it's at the heart of it all, Kevin, is the dishonesty. The just straight up, one of the things they discovered in the 50s was that there was not a single organization for any of the nuclear studies. The Manhattan Project boxes were everywhere, thrown in boxes, cluttered, just disheveled. Nobody had kept track. There was never one signature to test humans. Not one higher up ever said they were able to test humans, yet plenty of humans have been tested by the American government. So this whole thing about the environmental collapse, I don't know about you, but I think it's intentional. I think they know what they're doing.
Well, I don't know whether they've deliberately tried to do it. I think it's just the cavalier attitude of industrial sapiens with the total and utter disrespect to the living environment. That I think it's the rape and pillage of capitalism and militarism and imperialism have brought us to the brink of extinction. I don't know really whether they thought have done it deliberately. I wouldn't think that. I think they were just so callous and milking the living planet to death. And what everyone thought, and still think most people still think, is that this problem is long off in the future. It's our children and our grandchildren's problem. But it's not. It's unraveling now in live, in real time.
That's right. That's right. That is exactly right. I mean, I know children myself that have been affected by food. I mean, I know a little boy. He has a heart problem, and I think he had a heart attack like 8 months after Fukushima. And he also came down with cancer like the next year. People have autoimmune deficiencies. I mean, we see the disappearing insects, for goodness sakes. Like, at a really base level, we don't have the same amount of creatures that we used to. And people don't. This is the interesting thing, though, Kevin, because you live where? Way, way far away. New Zealand, right?
Yeah, I live on a small island called Rakino Island in the Hauraki Gulf.
Right. You're kind of like living the life of, what was that book that prompted Helen Caldecott, On the Beach, where the whole world was contaminated and you're just waiting for it to come to your shore? That's sort of what you're doing.
Well, a moment ago, your listeners will have heard that there was a cicada buzzing the room.
Right.
One of the things that I notice here is that where I'm living, I have a fully functioning ecosystem. But when I was a child and I drove on the mainland in New Zealand, or my mother was driving and I was a child, one of my main jobs the next morning, if she drove at night, the next morning I had to go and wash the bumper, the headlights, the bonnet and the windscreen of her car, because they would be covered in bug splatter. Mm-hmm. That's gone.
Right.
The insect apocalypse is unfolding in real time as we speak. The Guardian have just published an article I see in the last day or two about an insect apocalypse. And what they do is they say, in 50 years there'll be no insects on the planet if it carries on at this rate. Mm-hmm. But it's non-linear. A non-linear collapse. It's accelerating exponentially. That's why I want people to question everything that's being said in the mainstream media, and also question everything I say. If you can come up with something and say, Hester's exaggerating, show me the science. Don't just attack with ad hominem attacks like Guy McPherson and I are used to. We're delivering a most unpalatable story, so no one wants to hear it. If people have children or grandchildren, to hear what I say is like a poke in the eye to those people. I understand that, but if their grief response is to shoot the messenger, then so be it. But that's what all empires do. The minute someone like Guy McPherson sticks his head up above the parapet, they silence them. They don't want the general public to know that we've incinerated the biosphere and it's going to collapse in a very, very short period of time. They want everyone out there peddling and keeping the wheels of capitalism going for as long as possible.
So, Kevin, let me ask you this. Can you project out, at the rate that we're going in 5 years, what do you foresee environmentally?
I could conceive of a complete and utter collapse of the biosphere in 5 years.
And what does that mean? Like, we'll have big, gigantic storms that will cause volcanoes erupting, or what will happen?
It'll be the whole gamut. We will have storms. James E. Hansen many years ago wrote a book called The Storms of My Grandchildren. We'll have superstorms that can fire 1,000-ton boulders out of the ocean onto the beaches. We will have wind forces that we have never seen in modern times, and by modern times I mean in the last few 100,000 years, not since we humans have been walking the planet. We'll have superstorms. We'll have pestilence coming out of the melting permafrost in the Arctic. There are a whole lot of diseases already remotivating as the permafrost melts. There was a whole lot of reindeer killed in Siberia a year or two ago from smallpox, which had been eradicated. There's a whole lot of things that we know of that are coming, but the reality is It's got to be worse than we know. I joke, people think Guy and I are alarmists. And the reality is that what Guy and I know, is only part of the story. It can only be worse than we know.
Well, so what's the suggestion to the listeners? Like, how do you prepare for that? What do you do? That's a lot of information to unload at people. You know what I mean? Like, people listening to this, I mean, this has been part of why, to be honest, I've hesitated to do I used to do this radio show 3 times a week, and I'm doing it once a week. And that is the primary reason, because I want people to know this information. I don't disagree with you. You and I disagree about the geoengineering. I think it is part of a grander program that is connected to the nuclear and the military. I don't know how, because we're on a need-to-know basis, and we don't need to know. But one thing that is for sure, we have all the signs of the environment is that it's collapsing in. It's like a sinkhole. You know what I mean? We see it coming. It's happening. People don't believe that the house is going to fall into the hole, right? So how do people, other than live your bucket list, live your life, be kind to yourself, treat each other kindly, be nice, eat well, make an effort not to contribute to blatant pollution. I mean, what do people do with this information, Kevin? What's the point of your activism? Why are you out there talking about it? What do you want people to do with it?
Very, very soon, we are going to have 1 billion really angry young people on this planet when they realize their entire future has been stolen from them, and that previous generations have lived the good life while grinding the living planet into dust. What I'm trying to do is live an authentic life. I'm trying to be honest about the situation as I see it, and I want to pay respect to both the ecosystem and to those young people by not bullshitting them about how bad the situation is. In terms of what we can do, I think the entire school curriculum should be scrapped. And our schools should be teaching kids resilience. I spoke last at a deep green bush school in south of Auckland, where they're teaching kids resilience and bushcraft. Right. I think those things would be a very good thing to be teaching. Plant identification.
My grandchildren are homeschooled, and they go to a farm school 2 times a week, and they teach them plant identification, they learn, part of their schooling is learning about these plants and how to grow, and about earth science, about stuff that I never knew. I grew up in LA. You know what I mean? Like, I was afraid to eat a blackberry off of a bush when I first got to Oregon. I was really afraid to pick a blackberry and put it in my mouth. I thought it needed to go through some kind of cleansing.
Had to go through a supermarket to be
edible.
My
daughter looked at me, she's like, Mom, they don't come out with plastic wrap on them. I mean, I have to say, it is my children, as we speak about the younger generation, my own children are so inspiring because they get it. And, it's interesting because I'm the one who does the show about the radioactive contamination, the thing that nobody wants to discuss. No one wants to talk about it. And for the same reason you do, Kevin, I don't want to give anybody any pack of lies and pretend like it's all okay and it's not so bad, because it is worse. If people even understood, this is the part that I've also learned, it's not just radioactivity, it's the chemicals, it's the sister chemicals that go along with this process that's necessary to create the whole nuclear industry. They dump that too, and it causes just as catastrophic illnesses, and it is everywhere. They have done grotesque things to our planet. We are going to, I think the collapsing environment will be a gift from Gaia. If we have a chance, if we even have, 1,500 humans surviving, we could recreate and repopulate and maybe be a more peaceful creature, not based on war. That's what I mean, that's kind of like my hope for the future, is that we just give up this war machine, because we have been I've actually gotten into arguments with someone who said that they think that that's the nature of man, is war. So of course we're going to have war. It's like if we just accepted it, then we wouldn't have to, feel that resistance. We would just be part of it.
That sounds like PR from the military-industrial complex.
No. Needless to say, that conversation ended I was like, because that's not a conversation I'm not going to talk about. It's like there's a conversation going. One of my YouTubers said something about he had seen an anti-nuke guy talking about how much he thinks hate is a good emotion. We need to hate. Everybody talks about love is the answer. No, hate is the answer, because hate is stronger than love, and I disagree with that. But they were like, well, I think hate is an emotion that helps us move to the courage place where we got to be, because we are going to hate people. Like, you can't help but hate these people that have done this to us. We did not ask for this. They are doing it to us. It's like sexual predators. They are doing it to us. So, what's going on?
Yeah, I can't get my head around hate being a good thing. No. But I think anger is a valid response. Right. I think we're entitled to be angry, and the young people are gonna be really angry, and we're gonna have to figure out. We're all collectively, as elders, need to think: how are we going to talk about this with our young people, and what are we gonna say?
Well, you'd have to say the fact. Is like, for me, I was actually totally 100% brainwashed until Fukushima happened, to be honest. I grew up in Southern California. I'm from Redondo Beach, California. That's where I was before I left the state. And I lived there all of my childhood and most of my adult life. And I went back and forth down the 405 freeway to San Diego and past the San Onofre nuclear power plant most of my adult life. I never knew it was a nuclear power plant. I thought it was a military observatory. That's what I thought it was.
Classic.
And I am telling you, this is why, I am very open about who I am. I'm just a regular human being, a cog in the wheel. Professionally, I'm a tax resolution specialist. That's what I mean, talk about being in the machine. But I advocate on behalf of people. And I'm actually at the end of that. I can't do it anymore because I can't be part of... I just don't want to be part of that. I don't want to know all these stories. I just can't do it. So I'm at the end of that. But it's interesting to see how much I just trusted the whole system. And that is who we are as people, right? So I understand... because I've been listening to you for the last few days, because I wanted to make sure I didn't ask you the same questions you've been asked over repeatedly in interviews. And I was kind of stunned to hear you say you've been doing this for 40 years. You've really been actively engaged for 40 years.
Well, the point I would like to reiterate with that is how rewarding it has been. I've met wonderful, empathetic, caring fucking people on all of these campaigns that we've waged over the years. It's given my life meaning, and it's justified my space on the biosphere. So I think that it's the most important work that I've done in my life.
Do you think you've made a difference in the outcomes? Have much of your activism made differences in the outcome and the actions of the perpetrators? Yes,
I firmly do believe that. When we had the anti-apartheid campaign here in New Zealand, we received a handwritten letter written by Nelson Mandela from his prison cell in Robben Island.
Wow.
Our organisation, Halt All Racial Tours, I wasn't on the demo. They stopped a rugby game in the Waikato in New Zealand. And that game was being broadcast into Nelson Mandela's cell. And in the letter he said, "You shone a ray of sunshine into a very dark cell." So that alone makes for me every hour and every risk we took in that campaign, it made it all worthwhile. And then I was this tiny, tiny little split pin in the whole machine that evolved into the anti-nuclear movement in New Zealand. I had a very tiny part to play. I want to make that. I wasn't any leader or anything like that. But we inspired anti-nuclear activists around the world. They saw victory. We won. So, those two things have been pretty important in my life, and I'm proud of them.
Well, what's interesting is I think you guys' gains really, in lots of ways, helped the nuclear... this is the thing. I genuinely believe when Fukushima happened, literally I said to myself, thank God we have President Obama, because he would tell us the truth. For real.
Right.
And I was stunned when I found out a year and a half later that we had been deceived and how deceptive the whole thing is. But it is true that we have to just keep on, because they're not going to stop. That's the thing. If nobody challenges them, we really will not even have... as it is, when you talk about these cataclysmic changes, what do you think will happen with all these nuclear and mines and these pits of just slush and poison that are eyesores all around the world?
What will happen in the very near future is industrial civilization will fall over as a result of A, it being financed on a Ponzi scheme, and B, the multiplicative effects of tipping points that we've crossed and the climate crisis. There are two British scientists who have recently released papers and gone public. One's called Jem Vendel and the other is Rupert Reed, and both of them are talking about the collapse of industrial civilization within a decade. And my former guest on Nature Bats Last on the Progressive Radio Network, that's my radio show, his name was Paul Ehrlich, and Paul Ehrlich said probably 5 or 6 years ago that he thought that we were looking at the collapse of industrial civilization within a decade or two.
I heard that. Why don't you tell people how to find that right now? Why don't you I suggest that you tell them how to find Nature Bats Last? Can they just go to the internet and type in Nature Bats Last?
Yes, so it's Nature Bats Last is the name of the show on the Progressive Radio Network, PRN.FM. Guy McPherson and I are the hosts. You can also find any of these sort of discussions that I have and anything that I think is very important, I post on my website. I don't post there too often. It's every week or 2 weeks I post something, but I try and make sure that when I do post on the website that it's an important piece of information, and I back it up with embedding a whole lot of corroborating links. My website is kevinhester.live.
It's actually excellent, to be honest, Kevin. I thought you were had been doing that for quite, it's really actually pretty good, very well organized. And your show, Nature Bats Last, is something that you can just subscribe to be honest. That's what I suggest to people. Pay attention, and when you hear guests on my show that are interesting, go to their websites and listen to them and listen to their ideas and figure out how you can get engaged, because you're right. I think that's our answers to the youth, is what are we doing? I'm doing everything I can. I'm doing as much as I can, and I know it's pointless to call our elected officials, but I still do it. I call Ron Wyden and I call Jeff Merkley. They're making decisions, and at least I'm going to tell them what I think. It's pathetic how co-opted they all are in every nation, even your own. It's beyond comprehension.
Oh, it's the whole political discourse is being totally hijacked in New Zealand. The head of the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand, is the co-leader is a guy called James Shaw. He used to work for KPMG, the big finance house, God. And he was a consultant to Shell Petroleum and Coca-Cola, and now he runs the Greens. He's running the Greens into the ground, into the dirt.
Yeah, well, it's sad. It's sad that people get co-opted for money, or that they don't have the courage to stand up. It's not just about the money. A lot of them feel like they can't, otherwise they would be threatened. But they need to stand up to this being coerced. it is time for the scientists and for people who are engaged in all this to have some ethics.
Well, it's a lot to do with self-interest and ego. These people, if they stay in Parliament for a few terms, they get a lifetime salary, and also they have the corporate media massaging their egos, and they are completely corrupted by it. I think capitalism is a toxic force that corrupts anyone who gets immersed in it.
Yeah.
You see billionaires getting up in the morning and going off to work to make more money.
Yeah.
If that's not an addiction, what is?
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is, it's really, it's inhumane the way it's all run. It's kind of very narcissistic. It's why we have narcissists are most world leaders, because they need their codependents, the people who don't have a self-esteem, to manipulate and control. And that's what capitalism is all about. I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you, and I can pay you less money because you work for me. I mean, it's a very inhumane system to just use, and consume. But I think that we're on the path of recovery. To be honest, the whole thing's going to collapse. What will get us through, and even if we go extinct, there's going to be somebody living till the very end. Because guess what? We're all dying every single day anyways. Life is from life to death. That's it. That's the path of a little tiny human life. And I think the point is to be kind to each other and kind to ourselves, and honor our planet Earth as much as we can. I mean,
that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to treat as gently as I can on Gaia while she's still alive.
Right.
I volunteer at a native nursery on the island, a not-for-profit nursery, where we propagate plants for a rewilding program. I believe that these plants will be consumed by runaway abrupt climate change very soon. But I'm planting every day. I went down and watered yesterday. We were supposed to do this interview yesterday, and I had a major water leak at the nursery, and I had to go and fix the plumbing and transfer water from the neighbour's property and all of those things. I'm going to do that sort of stuff until the lights go out.
Exactly.
It's my final act of rebellion.
That's it. Happiness is resistance. That's what I think. I refuse to be unhappy, and I refuse to be afraid. I really believe love is greater than fear. And that gets into this. I really do love our planet and love each other, love myself. And I think that's our gift on our planet is love. And we have turned away from that for money and greed. And guess what? The money and greed is going to collapse. So what, as Guy McPherson says, only love remains.
And in the interim, I follow what the late great desert anarchist Edward Abbey used to say. His philosophy was, action is the antidote to despair.
Exactly.
Just get out there and fight those systems, folks. It's a rewarding, honourable, authentic thing to be doing as we make our last stand against the monster that's grinding the living planet into dust.
Mm-hmm. And actually, it really, it's funny because my friend Charlotte Anthony, she's a permaculturist. I've interviewed her on my UCY TV when I had my radio show. She talks about the earth, and she really believes, for us, she gave up her career. She was a chiropractor and a healer, and she gave up her career to go live on the earth, and she went to India and learned how to farm without rain. And it really is about the microbes and feeding the plants and learning about the symbiotic relationship between the plants and us, and getting back to that forgotten knowledge. And she said, after 3 years of an organic farm, you will remediate the earth from all the contaminants. It takes 3 to 5 years. That's it. How healing is the planet. It has all this capacity to heal. So that kind of gave me optimism, and that's what I just decided. I'm going to hang on to optimism even in the face of despair, because we don't have any other options. That's kind of how I feel, Kevin.
In response to you using the word despair, can I quote from an essay written by Joanna Macy called "The Greatest Danger"?
Please.
Quote: because of social taboos, despair at the state of our world and fear for our future are rarely acknowledged. The suppression of despair, like that of any deep recurring response, contributes to the numbing of the psyche. Expressions of anguish or outrage are muted, deadened as if a nerve had been cut. This refusal to feel impoverishes our emotional and sensory life. Flowers are dimmer and less fragrant, our love's less ecstatic. We create diversions for ourselves as individuals and as nations in the fights we pick, the aims we pursue, and the stuff we buy. It's a very, very good essay. I suggest everyone do a quick search, and it was published on thedailygood.org.
And what's the title of it?
The Greatest Danger by Joanna Macy.
Sounds awesome. I mean, this is the thing, people, this is what I mean. We do have a capacity to heal. I mean, now whether our species is going to be, I mean, this is the interesting thing, don't you think, Kevin? Like, it kind of hurts our feelings. The idea that our species and every species would go extinct is like so unfathomable. It's like objectionable to people. But we're on a trajectory of hitting the wall hard very soon. And so it's really important for people to do what they can to live their good life, to improve the environments around them immediately.
Be authentic at the edge of extinction.
Exactly. Well, that takes courage to be authentic. That's the hard part. You know, we've been trained to like put on a happy face, you know, because you think you're going to get ostracized at work. And frankly, my YouTube videos, I have people make horrible comments to me about what a terrible interviewer I am. I delete all the comments, but it's like, wow, people say mean things. So this is why people don't venture out to be authentic. They'd rather put up a little fakey face so that they will be affirmed instead of, you know.
There's another quote in that article from the Zen poet Thich Nhat Hanh. He was asked, what do we most need to do to save our world? And his answer was, what we most need to do is hear within us the sounds of the earth crying.
Exactly.
Let's just be honest, folks. Let's just face the music.
That's exactly right. And the fact is, we are facing it. We're having cataclysmic storms. We're having droughts. We're having floods. I mean, we're having tornadoes. I mean, we are having to face it. But the fact is, we need to just really embrace, I guess, our responsibilities. That's the thing. I encourage people to actively engage. Find something. You know, like, you and I don't agree on the geoengineering thing, but some people do. So go volunteer finding out that information and getting it out into the world if you think it's real. Like, a lot of people criticize me because they think I overstate the effects of radioactivity on the planet. And I don't think we have even studied it. In fact, that is the fact. You know, that
I think near-term human extinction as a result of runaway abrupt climate change will spare us the multi-generational horror of the nuclear industry. If we weren't going to get wiped out by climate change, what we would have seen as the generations go forward is the complete and utter destruction of our genetic makeup. Already people are seeing it in the Ukraine from Chernobyl. Already people are seeing it. Daja Mail, my friend and a great writer at truthout.org, he reported on the use of depleted uranium munitions in Fallujah in Iraq and the birth defects that have come out there already.
Right.
So, you know, if you want to look at a positive thing about our extinction, is that we're not going to have to face watching our genetic construction fall apart.
Good news, folks. Thanks to the nuclear industry, we'll be happy we're gone.
Well, you know, gallows humor is a valid response to the situation. You've got to find a way to laugh. There's no point in just walking around.
I mean, that's what I mean. Happiness is resistance. Because you know what? The people that are oppressing us, the ones that created this and are continuing to perpetuate it, they prefer us to be miserable because miserable people are easy to control. One
of the great quotes from my comrade Bobby Sands, who died on hunger strike in a British prison in Ireland in 1981. One of Bobby's famous quotes was, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children."
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So do anything you can to give the kids a laugh and give them as much resilience as possible.
Mm-hmm.
that's something we can do for them. There's always something you can do. Just don't be attached to the outcome. Do what you think is the right thing.
And be kind and loving. I think it's really important to be loving and kind. Like, it's easy to be snappy and mean and stuff, but you know what? It is really much more beneficial to come at things from especially with younger children and small children. I don't think that the children of today get the kind of tender care that they used to. At least when I was a kid, what I see among the adults, they might mollycoddle them and let them get along, but no firm, real leadership. You know what I mean? Like, no, I don't know. I just find that people are just kind of brusque with kids these days. They just hand them a tablet and hand them their cell phones and say, go play and be quiet. You know, like, I mean, we have to...
I saw someone recently giving a tablet to a 3-year-old, and the person mentioned to the person beside her that it was the babysitter.
Wow.
I almost cried.
Wow. That's upsetting, but you know what? Like, I don't know. I don't think I'd have a tablet near my kids. I mean, it's interesting. My daughter has been kind of like this the way I have been. She has 4 children, and they get maybe an hour on the computer a week. They don't have access to the computer. They don't have a television in their house. They're homeschooled. They go to farm school. I mean, it makes a huge difference. They're much more stable children, and they are resilient. Like, they know how to do things. They know how to build fires. They identify plants. Oh, my goodness.
One of the things that I do on Rakino Island is I take all the kids, the island kids, down to the beach, and I teach them scuba diving. And one year we qualified a 4-year-old.
Wow.
And what I do is I get them to stand in water up to their hip, put the regulator in their mouth, make sure they can breathe easily, and then I get them to sit down so the water is just above their head. And I say to them, if you're uncomfortable, stand up. So I take the kids down and I give them those skills. And the reason I do it is because I fell in love with the oceans as a result of watching Jacques Cousteau when I was a young fellow, and watching him explore the world on his yacht Calypso. And it inspired me to love the oceans and to want to go out there and do it. And that led on to me doing 16 ocean passages on small yachts around the planet.
Wow.
So we can still do that for kids.
Yeah. And in fact, I think it's really important that our kids have like a lot of these type of life skills. How to swim, how to boat, how to sail, how to grow, just the things that people need to live on the earth without being part of the system. I think it's super important. But you know what, Kevin,
now build resilience now while you've got a chance.
Well, you know, I hope that people will give themselves a chance and give themselves some resilience lessons. I think part of the reasons people don't teach their kids is they don't know themselves. So it's about us all growing up and learning together, to be adults together. Like, adults need to be adults. Adults need to embrace life and enjoy living. I think in the States we get all caught up with having to make ends meet because so many people barely make ends meet, right? You're on that little rat wheel along with me. But I still adhere to this idea that happiness is resistance. Like, if you stick to the idea that we're going to be as good as we're going to be for as long as we're going to be here. We can't change. Like, I've embraced this idea that we have very little effect on the nuclear industry, on the energy industries, the coal. I mean, they don't care what we think. They could care less. They're going to do what they're going to do, period. And
business as usual until collapse unfolds. That's the paradigm we're in.
Bing, bing, bing. Exactly. Wow. Kevin, this hour has gone very, very, very fast. I super appreciate it. I hope you will come back. I would love to have you back on.
Well, let's get some feedback from your listeners and see how they feel. If anyone has other questions that they want to ask me, I'd be happy to do it again.
And please go to Kevin's podcast and listen to them. And you guys are on weekly, right?
No, it's a monthly show. It used to be weekly, but we've scaled back because we're trying to live our motto and make the most of every day and get as much time as we can out in nature. So the show's been carved back to monthly now.
Oh, okay. I thought I was missing out because I've been looking for them. I actually do listen. I actually listened to the podcast a couple of times because a lot, like your last guest, like a lot of the stuff that is said is so fascinating. I like to go back and listen to it twice because there are several times because there's just so much information that's really out there that nobody's sharing that you guys are sharing with the world. It's very interesting. I super appreciate it.
Yeah, our guest last month, or our February guest was Daja Mail, staff reporter at truthout.org, and we discussed his latest book, The End of Ice.
Right.
I will be coming here to New Zealand in July, and me and him will tour the country where he'll be doing readings from the book, and I'll try and get each one of those and the Q&As after filmed so that people around the world can follow the tour, and we'll be discussing the book, and we'll be discussing things that are unfolding each day and week as we go forward. Right. So that was Dar in this month's episode, and next month I'm going to be interviewing Professor Paul Ehrlich, who in 1968, when I was 8 years old, he wrote The Population Bomb. He knew that we were heading for trouble if we still carried on with breeding like bacteria, and now we're in that situation where the petri dish is empty.
Well, that will be awesome. Well, look, Kevin, thank you so much, and I really appreciate all of our listeners for joining us, and you can follow us at Nuts for Art. I'm also on KEPW.org, 97.3 FM in Eugene, Oregon. So thanks a lot. Put your courage feet on. Thank you, Kevin, so much. I really appreciate it.
Most welcome. You and Libby Levy are doing a wonderful job shining a light on the nuclear industry. I tip my hat to you both.
Well, thank you so much. Levy is actually awesome.
I
can't bear. I'm treading water, but I mean, I'm doing. The thing is, as I said earlier, I'm a new person to all of this, thinking that everything is not really okay. So it's like my own come to Jesus moment here about what's going on with the world. And how do we grapple with it? That's why I understand why people run away. Because the hard question is, how do you grapple with it? And I think you're leading the way. You volunteer. You embrace your life. You live your life. But you still face up to the truth and talk about it. And you try to stem the tide as much as you can.
I want to be authentic and truthful at the edge of extinction. I want to be able to look the kids in the eye and say, I tried. I failed, but I tried.
Right. We did the best we could. We made every effort we could. Thank you so much, Kevin. You've been listening to Lonnie Clark and Kevin Hester with the Age of Vision radio show. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining the Age of Vision radio show. Please like, subscribe, and share on Spreaker.com or on the YouTube channel Nuts for Art, NUTZFORART. Send all comments and ideas to Lonnie Clark at ageofvision@gmail.com. We urge all, especially scientists and politicians, to follow the words of our beloved American icon, Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest.